we are going to take you straight away to Houston, NASA Mission Control, where the team there are just awaiting SpaceX crew's mission to re-enter and splash down off the coast of California. Now, just a little bit of context for you. The four-person crew are back a little bit early. The quartet leaving a little more than a month earlier from the International Space Station than the original departure because of what's described by NASA as a serious medical concern with one of the crew's members. So parachutes deployed, and I'm going to speak to somebody who really knows exactly this moment, former astronaut Helen Sharma. Helen, welcome. You were the first British person to go to space. You actually were on the Mir, the Russian predecessor to the International Space Station. What are we watching right now?
So this is the SpaceX Crew Dragon spacecraft coming back. They've already decelerated through the atmosphere. The two drogue chutes have opened up. So now we're waiting to see the four main parachutes that we should be looking at coming down just before they splash down. So they're decelerating, slowing down so they can have a fairly comfortable bump into the ocean.
A bump into the ocean. For what kind of speed are they going at by this point?
Oh, this is, we're talking probably 100 miles an hour, something like that. But it's rapidly slowing. And look, we've got these, we can now see it above, actually. We can see all four chutes are coming out beautifully. Fantastic. So those what we saw as two from an angle looks like four. So we've got all four chutes have opened up nicely. So they've got the best deceleration. It's all gone completely to plan so far. They were a little bit late leaving the space station, but more rather getting strapped into their spacecraft. But since then they've caught up the time. They're going to splash down just close to San Diego. So a very comfortable place. They've got the rescue teams will be already there. Apparently the weather conditions are pristine, is the word that NASA used earlier on. So everything should be all in their favour following this, of course, very, very rapid return to Earth from what they were expecting. They weren't expected to be back on Earth until the end of February.
So, yeah, and that's because what they're describing, NASA, a serious medical concern with one of the crew members, and it actually led NASA to postpone 2 scheduled spacewalks. Obviously this has never happened before in the 25-year history of the International Space Station, but they've got medical equipment up there, don't they? They've got capabilities to treat people.
Yes, of course. I mean, you think of it as being sort of some very well-trained people with some amazing equipment, but it's not the type of equipment, all of the equipment, let's say, that you'd have in a big hospital. Think of it as being a really big ambulance with a whole load of other people around as well, with a whole load of extra support from a backup crew that they can contact by radio. They can deal with an awful lot of minor issues and do, right? And frequently do. People get toothache, they get backache, they get nausea, they get infections. We've even had thrombosis, so a blood clot in somebody's jugular vein a few years ago. That was treated with blood thinners. So ultrasound scans, we can do a whole lot of stuff, but we don't have big scanners like MRI scans, CT scanners, and other equipment and expertise that a hospital would have. Astronauts have come home early before, though. Way back in the 70s and 80s, a few cosmonauts returned to the Soviet Union because of various issues in space. Kidney stones is one of the big things, as you lose bone mass, the calcium coming out of your bones means it's more likely for astronauts to get kidney and bladder stones. So all of these issues can affect astronauts perhaps a little more than they might affect people on Earth. But astronauts are fit, they're chosen because they're healthy. They've got lots of medical screening and they keep themselves in good shape. So we were expecting a splashdown. I'm just sort of looking at my screen. We're expecting a splashdown sort of by about now. It looks like it's still on its way towards the surface of the sea.
Helen, I wonder if we could just benefit from your personal experience, because, as the first British person to go to space, there it is. And they're on the water.
Yeah.
Just remind us, so you were...
67 days in space, Dragon and NASA astronauts
let's have a listen into NASA Mission Control.
Kimiya Yui of JAXA and Roscosmos cosmonaut Oleg Platonov are back on Earth.
Yeah, so there's a confirmation from Mission Control that the quartet are now down on Earth just over a month, just a little more than a month earlier than planned because of that serious condition. We have the absolute privilege of speaking to Helen Sharma, former astronaut, first British person to go to space. Helen, you were at the Mir station, the Russian predecessor to the International Space Station. Really stupid question right now. How did you get back down to Earth?
So, in a funny way, very similar. I used a Soyuz spacecraft instead of a Crew Dragon, and Soyuz, or a version of it, still does go to and from International Space Station, of course. But in a very similar way, we climbed into our re-entry spacecraft. We separated from the space station. We jettisoned our service module before we fired our re-entry rockets, whereas this time SpaceX Crew Dragon did it the other way. I believe sometimes it does do it the other way. It can do either, but they decided this time to jettison their service module, which is where you have a load of equipment, solar panels, that kind of thing. So they jettisoned that after they'd done their deorbit burn. We did our deorbit burn after we'd jettisoned, but similar, very similar way. You re-enter the atmosphere, and it's that atmosphere re-entry after your orbit burn where you feel the most deceleration. So you fire your rocket engines to slow you down sufficiently to come back towards the atmosphere, and you feel a bit of deceleration from that burn, that as you're firing your engines. But the most deceleration is through the atmosphere. So we had about just over 5G, about 5.5G of deceleration. It's a little easier in Crew Dragon, between 3 and 5G they would have experienced. The actual, the parachutes come out. We had 3 chutes. Crew Dragon has 4. So it's all made generally to make it a little bit more comfortable, as they can do with technology these days for the astronauts. They even had some nice cool air pumped into their spacesuits to keep them a bit cooler, because I do remember it being pretty warm during that re-entry. But you feel a big jerk when these parachutes open. The spacecraft jerks from side to side quite violently. Crew Dragon does. I'm not sure if that does it quite as badly as Soyuz did, but although we're aware it's going to happen, I think that was quite a big surprise to me how violent that would have actually felt. And then when you do actually touch down, of course, splash down, as we can see in the ocean with from SpaceX, and we actually landed on dry land in Kazakhstan, a nice flat dry part of the world. Different ways depending on whether you've got more ocean or more dry land at your disposal.
So you landed on dry land. So what was the force like, the hit like?
Well, it's a bit like a car crash.
Wow.
So we do have some what we call soft landing engines. There were 4 when I launched. So I was launched and landed in 1991. Now there have been developments, so there are 6 of these soft landing engines to make that landing a little bit more comfortable. Always we like to modify these spacecraft to make it better and better, more comfortable for the astronauts. But no, because you're not diving through the water, like so a splashdown, you're really wanting to end up on the surface, and water can't really absorb much of the energy of that impact. Whereas imagine landing on a nice ploughed field, you can actually absorb quite a lot of impact in that way. So it's not as bad as it sounds, but nonetheless, it is quite a bump. And of course, if it's windy on the day of the landing, which it was when we landed, the spacecraft itself is dragged along a bit with the parachutes, and it tumbles a little bit as well, head over heels. So you don't actually stop for a few more seconds. We ended up on our sides. Crew Dragon has ended up nicely with its let's say now its bottom in the ocean. Astronauts inside it will be really starting to already adapt to feeling heavy again. And that's quite a weird transition. It's almost, if you felt a little bit nauseous when you went into space, you'll feel a little bit nauseous likely when you return to Earth, for instance. So it's not always the most comfortable thing for them.
Extraordinary, your lived experience. You, as I mentioned, you were on the Mir, which was a Russian space station, a predecessor to where these guys, this quartet, have just splashed down from, the International Space Station. So let me ask you, so are you an astronaut or a cosmonaut?
Well, Mir was Soviet, really. It was before the disintegration of the Soviet Union. But you know what? I answer to either astronaut or cosmonaut. My language, my native language, the UK. Which is I'm a citizen of. We speak English. The word is astronaut. The Russian word is cosmonauts, really, which we've adapted to so we can distinguish between astronauts and cosmonauts. But now people train with both. If you're not an American citizen or a now Russian citizen. You will train with various different space agencies possibly and did different programs. So, what does it really matter, I guess, what we're called? So I don't mind, I answer to either.
Well, it's fascinating because the quartet here, we've got four of them, obviously, and Oleg Platonov is being described as a Roscosmos, as a cosmonaut. And I always used to think that was because, you have that differentiation because of the historic competition between the West and the USSR to get into space, to be the first at developing their technologies.
I think, yes, it was really, I'm sure, an American adaptation of the word cosmonaut so that we can distinguish them and us, right? Because it was just then cosmonauts and astronauts. But, Kimiya Yui, who is also one of the Crew 11 crew, who's just splashed down today, he's from Japan. So the Japan Aerospace Exploration Agency, that, if you like, the equivalent of the Japanese Space Agency, was often called. We also have a lot of Chinese astronauts. They fly as Chinese to a Chinese space station. We call them taikonauts. Sometimes the French will call their astronauts spationauts. So, yeah, it's a word.
Fascinating. So, Helen, we're watching the recovery teams now. They've been given the all clear. They are making that approach as the space, the Crew 11 are bobbing up and down in the water. What are they thinking inside their heads? You were there. You've experienced this, landing in the desert. What are they now thinking? They're obviously adapting, as you were saying, to gravity, but there must be so many thoughts. And obviously, with this, in this situation, they're concerned about the colleague, whichever one it is, because of this serious medical condition. But that kind of initial thinking of, my goodness, we've been up there for months. Now we're back here. How do you deal with that?
So it's part of a process. They will be, they'll have to remove, certainly I expect, some of their equipment. They might take off the tablets that are strapped to their legs, for instance. They might have to just make sure that any equipment that was stowed has remained properly stowed. And when we landed, there was a lot of bumping around, and so some of the stuff that we'd stowed was dislodged. So we are trying to sort of to move that out of the way so we could actually exit the spacecraft properly. I'm sure everything is much more sort of planned with many more times to practice this since my space flight, and Crew Dragon's been specially designed for all of this kind of process. So really they're waiting for the hatch to be opened, so making sure that they'll be opening their own visors, feeling a little bit, feeling a bit of ventilation, breathing possibly very soon some fresh air, and that'll be nice to get a bit of a smell of the sea air that they'll get after a splashdown. So it's really a question of that they'll be moving around as well. So when I remember moving my little finger and it felt heavy, right? So even all of that kind of movement, every small movement that they make, they'll be unstrapping, making sure that they can be pulled out relatively quickly. But yes, I suppose they will all be concerned for that one astronaut that we've been told did become ill in space. It sounded like it was a particular event, so it wasn't as though it was some sort of a gradual deterioration of a symptom. It wasn't as though they had an infection, but it sounds like there was a particular event. They needed some support by the rest of their crew. They will have all been trained for that, and they'll all been very, very caring for that particular member. But yes, there will be primarily concern for that particular crew member. Coming back through the atmosphere, physically the hardest part of the whole space mission. And so if there were some physical stress on the body, you would expect that this is the time that it might make its presence known. So if there's been some incident in space, they want to make sure that wasn't repeated during re-entry, and of course that will be one of the first things that Mission Control will be checking. And they were able to get communication back with the spacecraft as soon as they could. In fact, it was almost a little bit early this time, so I'm sure Mission Control have already ascertained, hopefully, that everything was fine, and now they just need to rescue the astronauts as normal, right? So this now becomes, although a bit earlier than expected, it's just a normal rescue.
It has to say, it's just they were due back just over little over more than a month. So it's not exactly that they've cut it really short, and it's not like the other guys that ended up staying up there for much, much longer. But just from you, Helen, as we await the first the hatch opening and seeing this quartet coming out, just remind us, because your history is just so fascinating. How on earth did you get up to the Mir space station? How did you become the first British person to go to space, the first European woman to go to space? Just remind us of your particular story.
There wasn't a UK human space program when I flew into space, so we had no. The UK was not pushing for astronauts, so therefore there was no job opening. I didn't ever consider being an astronaut, so it wasn't even on the radar anywhere. But all of a sudden, a mission was created. So this was when the Soviet Union was starting to open up a little bit politically to Western countries, and President Gorbachev wanted to offer a space flight on a Soviet space program to other Western countries. And the UK was one of the countries that he approached. Of course, Gorbachev, great buddies with our then Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher, and this mission was created. It was set up actually commercially, so a company was set up to manage it all, because the UK then had this policy of not funding human spaceflight, so taxpayers' money couldn't actually be used for it. But a company was set up to manage it commercially, and in collaboration with the Soviet Space Agency. I applied, right? So I heard of this opportunity. It was a bit like a job advert. Now it would be advertised perhaps on the radio and you'd apply online. Then I heard it on the radio and I applied, well, by phone, to be quite honest. I got home from work and phoned a call centre, and that's where it all started. 13,000 of us wanted to go into space then. So yeah, very, very popular, because of course there had not been an opportunity open to everybody in the UK. To go on a space mission. A few years earlier, there'd been some people, some UK military and I think a civil service person as well, training with NASA. One of them would have been the first British astronaut. But in the interim, before they actually got to fly, the Challenger accident happened. So that was back in 1986 when the space shuttle exploded during launch, and then NASA told all of its foreign trainees to go home while NASA sorted out its safety issues. And in the intervening time, Britain pulled out of having astronauts. So fortunately for me, that paved the way. So I got to go into space, and just the most amazing experience doing experiments there, feeling weightless for myself, the camaraderie with the crew, and the views out of the window. But it's that camaraderie that I think Crew 11 will be pulling on so much. I mean, they're not just with NASA, but the crew as well, been so careful not to let on, for privacy, of course, which astronaut has been taken ill, and what that illness might be. So it's been lovely to see how they've pulled together as a team.
It's just serendipity, isn't it, that you happened to hear that radio advert and were one of the 13,000 applicants to apply and then got through. Incredible story, absolutely incredible story, Helen. And what a perfect person to talk us through as we watch the mission control there in Houston. They must be relieved because, as you say, you pointed out to some of the complications and the tragedies that have been taking place during man's space exploration. This went according to plan. Must be such a relief. Goodness knows the amount of the amount of people that come together to make this possible.
Yes, huge numbers. I mean, we see on our screens the people in the control centres, right, in NASA, and the one we're seeing here at the moment is SpaceX's mission control. The one on the right of the picture there is NASA's. One on the left is SpaceX. It's just, but that's just the tip of the iceberg. When we think, we've just seen the rescue teams, for instance, and you're right, it's fraught with, let's say, there are still hazards in space. There are hazards about our operations returning to Earth, even when we've splashed down. There was one crew, a Soyuz crew, that splashed down a few years before I flew, and they actually ended up in a lake. They intended to come down on dry land, but the Soyuz, fortunately, is geared so that it can also come back in water if necessary. But they ended up on a lake, and it was very windy, and they almost drowned. Right, so that's one of the reasons why NASA's very, very keen, and of course with modern weather forecasting as well, we can try and make sure the splashdown is in an area that's just right, not just for the rescue teams to arrive, but also so that the weather is correct. So had the weather been awful today, right across that west coast of California, then I'm sure that they would have delayed this splashdown because it wasn't an emergency. They didn't have to get this astronaut back really quickly. It was just as quickly as reasonably possible in the safe way. So yeah, they and luckily everything did line up, so that yeah, they could it was the earliest they could reasonably return from space, and it was weather didn't put them off. But yeah, all sorts of things happen, and we're prepared for it. That's one of the reasons why astronauts are trained. Modern spacecraft much more autonomous, so it makes it much more easy. I don't think the astronauts in this particular spacecraft had to do an awful lot other than make sure that they were all, the visors were down, they were all fastened in, they'd stowed everything correctly. They were really monitoring what was going on. But still, if absolutely necessary, the pilot, Mike Fincke, would have been able to do some steering and make sure that they could hopefully still come back to Earth safely.
And Helen, of course, you were. It's really interesting to say that you were talking about this being a medical incident, and that's why these guys, this quartet, are back just over a month earlier than they initially planned. Because also, my understanding is that a number of scheduled spacewalks were also cancelled. Just from your experience up there in the Mir, the predecessor, the Russian predecessor to the International Space Station, did you get to do a spacewalk?
I would have loved to have done a spacewalk. All my experiments were inside the space station, except for one which I had to use a small airlock, not the one that they used to go out into space. So that was my nearest access, if you like, to the actual outer side of the space station. But there was an airlock where we have our all of our spacewalk suits, and I used to often go in there. It had windows pretty much all around it. And so that was a great area to be able to view different parts of the Earth and the stars as well. So I'd often sort of squidge my way in between these EVA suits, push them out of the way so that I could get access to the window that I wanted. So yeah, that was my nearest experience of doing a spacewalk. Just looking at this picture actually now, it looks like the spacecraft is being gradually brought closer and closer to the boat. So they SpaceX don't try and sort of open the hatch and rescue the astronauts sort of personally after splashdown. This is, you remember seeing pictures of the Apollo spacecraft. That's how that happened. Again, that can lead to possible drownings. If you imagine opening a hatch, you've got waves at sea, even when it's calm. So they like to bring the spacecraft into a boat first.
Indeed. And then, Helen, I'm just going to interrupt because my colleague Lewis Vaughan-Jones will take over, but it's been a privilege to speak to you. Helen Sharman, former astronaut, first British person to go to space. A privilege.